right, man.
Let's get this thing started, huh?
Let's get the party started.
All right, so we'll be talking about those in a little while.
All right, cool.
All right, so welcome to the Movie Media Podcast.
Thank you.
This is a podcast where we introduce people to some of the folks that we've been working with and talk a little behind the scenes stuff. But before we get to the project that we worked on together, nobody knows who you are. So, well, except me. So, would you start by introducing yourself, Chris? Go.
Yeah, I'm Chris Warner. I'm from New Iberia, Louisiana. I'm 55 years old, educated at LSU and the University of New Orleans. I've written and published 30 books. Some would call me a masochist for doing that. It's not easy. It's kind of a lonely gig being an author and a publisher independently like I've been. But, you know, I've had some success and I've had a lot of fun doing it. It's different.
Yes, no doubt. So I've known you for, it's going to be two decades soon. It's been a while, right?
It's been 22 years.
So if this has an informal vibe to it, then that'll be because of me. So I want to start by thanking you for dressing up.
You're welcome.
Yeah, what's with the beach bum attire?
One of the books that I wrote is Bushwhacked at the Floribama, the history of the famous bar, the beach dive out there, and it's about the life of Joe Gilchrist, the innovator, the fellow who came up with the idea to help people have fun in life. And I had written a true crime story, The Wagon to Disaster, about the Health South debacle with Richard Scrushy and Aaron Beam. Aaron Beam was my co-author on that book. He was the CFO, and he did 90 days in prison for his role in that fraud scheme, $3 billion healthcare fraud. And I was speaking to the Rotary Club in Birmingham in 2009, and Joe Gilchrist's brother, David, was a banker, and he said, "You should write a book about my brother. He's lived 5 lifetimes." I said, "I want to meet him. What does he do?" And he said, "He owns the Floribama." So I went down there and wrote the history of the Floribama, and for 10 years, I was the greeter at the front door of the Floribama. I'd wear a straw hat like this one, and I'd greet people every day, and I'd tell them, "Thank you for lowering your standards and being here today. We really appreciate it."
For those that haven't been to the Floribama, could you just, as succinctly as possible, describe the vibe? What is it, and what's a bushwhacker?
The Floribama is open 365 days a year. They have live music every day. There's 3 stages on the weekends going at one time. They have a couple of restaurants across the street, a marina. It's on the beautiful Gulf of Mexico. It is a fun place. It's a place where you wipe your feet on the way out. You know, it's bohemian in a word. It's really a lot of fun. I can't believe that I spent a decade there doing what I did, but I was fortunate, and it certainly shaped me into the person that I am today. Joe used to always tell me, he goes, "Chris, you know, you have a PhD, you've written all these books." He goes, "You need to unwind a little bit, buddy. You need to be a little more useless in life." And I've been trying to do that ever since. So I dressed up today for you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So what is a bushwhacker again?
The bushwhacker is their signature drink. It's a frothy concoction. It's like the consistency of a Wendy's Frosty, but it's for adults. It's spice rum, regular rum, cream de cacao, amaretto, Kahlua, milk, ice, all blended. And it has about 700 calories, but it packs a punch. And I usually stayed away from them.
So in your decade of being at the Floribama, how many times did you see a tourist down one too many too quickly?
Ooh, it's, you know,
because that was me the first time I went to come visit you there.
Well, that happens. And, you know, the thing about the Floribama is you want to pace yourself because there's all the music, there's all the characters there that play the music, there's the characters that work there, there's the people that are visiting that are characters, and you never know who you're going to run to there. You know, it's funny, famous people can go to the Floribama, but people aren't as interested in them as they are the good time that can be had. You know,
it is fun. It's a lot of fun. The music's great. Big Earl is a regular there.
Bigger. Jack Robertson goes by the handle of Big Earl, and he is funny. You know,
we did that video with him a long time ago.
Yeah, he's just retired. He's no longer doing his weekly gig, although I think he still works. He goes on the road quite a bit now. He's popular across the South.
Yeah, no doubt.
He does all the...
No one makes love like my sister can.
Oh, gosh. You know, Poontang on a pontoon. I mean,
Good times, good times, good
Yeah,
times.
it's a way of life down there. People have fun, and that's why they keep going back.
You spent a decade down there.
I
That's
spent a decade there. Yeah, a decade in Fairhope and a decade in Perdido Key. I decided to move out there. They invited me to take on that job as the greeter at the front door, and it was a lot of fun. I met a lot of people, and I'm not ashamed of all the fun I had. I'm not. I did it at a
can
good
we
time.
clip that? Can I clip that? That's the promo clip for this episode.
Right.
Where were you born? Let's start at the beginning. So you mentioned you ended up living in for 10 years in Mobile and 10 years in Pensacola, and then I want to just briefly step through all that. So where were you born? Where were you raised? How did you get out to Mobile, and then how did you end up getting to Florida?
I'm from New Iberia, Louisiana. It's a Spanish enclave within Acadiana. Of course, everyone there is Cajun because the Cajuns just have that joie de vivre, and everyone's Cajun in South Louisiana. You have to do like they do. But I grew up there and went to LSU and got a couple of degrees, and then a doctorate from UNO, and met a woman from Baton Rouge. We married and had a couple of kids. Then we moved out to the Fairhope area, and that's what kind of got us out there. I had met you prior to moving out there, so I was in Baton Rouge for 15 years for school and work in the area, and you and I came across paths then. But I'm back in Louisiana now, and it's like putting on an old pair of jeans. You just come back, and I really like Boudin. I like the food, and the people are endearing. And
How long have you been back for now?
I've been back 2 years.
Okay. So you said goodbye to Pensacola. I mean, what was the main driving force for leaving? I mean, I guess 10 years on the beach and you've had enough of the beach.
Yeah, and the owner of the Floribama, Joe, my good friend, he, after 5 or 6 years at the Floribama, he was like, you probably shouldn't be spending this much time here. He said, you should probably go on and do other things. But by then I was having fun, and he was always preaching having fun. I said, I'm not leaving. And so he tolerated me for a bit longer, but he got sick in 2022.
Oh, sorry.
He knew he was going to be checking out, and he said, look, I've already talked to the owners, and you're not going to be able to stay here once I'm gone. And I didn't know about him being sick, and I was like, where are you going? He goes, I'm going to die, bud. And he said, we're all going to die. And he said, that's why I'm always telling you need to have fun. And so, but he said, you need to go back to Louisiana. You're going to regret it if you don't. That's where your family is. You're from there. He said, take my word for it. Do what I'm telling you. And so I planned to come back, and I did. And I have enjoyed it. It's been interesting and fun. I got to, see you and your lovely family more, and friends that I had here that are still living here. And
it's home too. There's something about home. It's nice to be back. So you are living your life. I mean, you spent your entire adult life writing books. You're a legit author. That's your career. That's your primary source of income, and you're prolific. And so here you are now living in Louisiana. What does the life of an author look like exactly? Obviously, you're writing books, but how do you do that? And what do you spend your time doing every day?
Well, I'm usually writing every day when I have a project. When I start writing a book, I usually can write it within 6 months if I write every day.
Mm-hmm.
If I can put down 1,500 words a day, after 3 or 4 months, I've got 60, 70,000 words, and that's usually about how long my books are. I don't like to write really long books. Today, you have to compete with everyone's phone, their television, all the other things that distract us in this modern technological world. So I like to focus on telling a story succinctly and telling it well so that I get their attention, I get the allegory across, and, I tell the story at the beginning, the middle, and the end. But, my days usually start early. I like to write early because that's when I have the energy. I drink coffee. I get after it. I usually work for 2 or 3 hours, and usually that's it. And then after that, I have to try to get some exercise and do all the other things that I need to do as someone who writes books and sells books and publishes books for other people and so forth. There's a business side of it, as you know. But I do book signings. I do speeches. I do events. I'll go and sell books at festivals and fairs. I pretty much always trying to promote and sell my books, when I'm not writing. And it works out well. it helps to be doing it for a while. And most people now, having done it for so long, 25 years, if you say my name, they're like, that's the guy who writes books. I've met him.
So I have been to a couple of your regional speeches that you give, and dude, you are the best speaker when it comes to kind of, non-fiction stories. When you get up there and talk about whether it's the old tennis coach at LSU, or you talk about the guy from Wagon to Disaster out in the other state, or these books here, man, you've got some stories to tell. Can we focus on these? These are your two latest books.
Yeah, sure. We can hold them up. Let's
Dead
do this.
People, Crazy People, Drugs, and Politicians. What's that about?
Yeah, so one day when I was out at the Floribama doing my thing, I got a phone call, and I answered it. I didn't recognize the number, and it was a gentleman by the name of Terry King, whose dad is Sam King, who was the editor of the Baton Rouge Advocate sports page for 40 years, and he was one of their editors, too, on the board. And he had read Aaron Beam's book, The Wagon to Disaster, the one that's been on American Greed.
That's my favorite story you've written, by the way, The Wagon to Disaster.
Well, thank you. It's excellent, and they committed a fraud. They lied about their revenues to maintain their stock options and bonuses, and they go to prison with the governor. And he told me that he had heard Aaron Beam speak. He had read his book, had reached out to Aaron and said, how can I get in touch with Chris? I have a great story that I want to tell, and he's the guy I want to write it. And Terry called me. I always entertain all phone calls when someone has an idea, a story idea.
Mm-hmm.
I try to be gracious, and I try to be honest, because the world's full of mediocre books. And while some stories are worth telling, they might not be worth putting into print and trying to sell to people.
Okay.
And so Terry started into it, but there was something peculiar going on with him. Every 10, 15 seconds, he would cough, and he couldn't complete his sentences. And after him coughing several times, I said, what's up with the cough? And he said, well, I'm getting ready to put the sheriff and the district attorney in prison in St. Tammany Parish, and I'm getting death threats. He goes, this is a nervous cough. And, at that time, 5, 6 years ago, my life was really different. I was, living at the beach across the street from the Floribama, going to work in flip-flops and a T-shirt and a straw hat. And I really didn't want to dive into a story like that. It didn't appeal to me. And I told him, I said, Terry, I don't think I'm going to be interested in this right now. I really appreciate you reaching out to me, but I'm going to pass. I said, but I'm not going to say I'll never do it. It's just not good right now for me.
Sure.
And when I moved back to Louisiana a couple of years ago, I set out to try to speak to as many Rotary clubs as I could. And one of the clubs that booked me was the Slidell Rotary. And I spoke to them, and after it was over, I was signing a few books, and Terry came up to me. I didn't know what he looked like. And he just said, you going to write my book? And I'm like, well, you got a book? And he said, I called you. Remember, I'm Terry King. And I said, oh, yeah, the guy with the cough. And I was like, do you have anything written? Because I have to draw it out of people. I can't just, read their mind. They're going to have to draft it, writing it, or they'll have to record it, their story, what happened, the beginning, the middle, and the end. And he said, I've got the first 40 pages I gave the FBI. And I said, let me see that. And he emailed that to me. And then I saw what he had, and I said, I'm interested in doing this. And so he hired me to help him write his book. And we wrote Dead People, Crazy People, Drugs, and Politicians. And the title of that book deals with a coroner in Louisiana who deals with dead people. He deals with crazy people. He deals with drugs, and he deals with politicians because he is a politician. Mm-hmm. The coroner has to run for office, and the coroner is the only person that can arrest a sheriff in Louisiana. Mm-hmm. It's all part of the Napoleonic Code. But in this story, Terry's wife, he came to her aid. She was working for the coroner in St. Tammany Parish, and she saw $10,000 missing from her budget. So she brought it up at a staff meeting, and then the coroner realized she knew that he was a crook. No problem. And once he saw that she knew he was a crook, he tried to get her to do something illegal so he'd have something on her, and she refused. He fired her. She sues him for wrongful termination. It goes to the Louisiana Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court said, Mr. Coroner, Peter Galvin, you're being sued. You need to turn over these documents. And when he did, it provided the proof of criminality, that he was a criminal, that he was stealing money, he was paying himself for leave time, that he was actually taking. And Terry collated all this information, brought it to the FBI, and started an investigation into the coroner. Mm-hmm. But he also brought the information to an award-winning journalist, Lee Zurich, out of Fox 8 in New Orleans, who then produced 43 video segments on the evening news over a year's time. And he won the Pulitzer Prize for Video Journalism, the Alfred I. DuPont Award, for his work in this case and exposing the criminality of this public official, the coroner, Peter Galvin. And Peter Galvin got 3 years. He got 2 years in a federal facility and 1 year in a state facility. And when Terry went back to his Rotary Club, everyone patted him on the back, but they said, look, you can't stop. These guys are corrupt, and this guy's corrupt, the sheriff, the district attorney. And by then, Terry had aligned himself with these other military guys. He's a Navy vet. And they formed the Concerned Citizens of St. Tammany Parish, and then they went on after that and put 29 other politicians in prison over the last 20 years. So
I want to stop you there because I could listen to you all day. I love the way when you get into the stories, your voice is like, and this, and then it's great. So from a layperson's perspective, this story is very much something you'd have seen on the news. And this is kind of how it went down.
It was on the news. The thing is the news has to be careful what they put out there. And they have a short amount of time, of course, where they can cover these things. And a lot of this is prurient. These guys are not good people. They're evil, quite frankly. They're stealing from us, so they're disingenuous. And none of this made the news. That's what makes these book-worthy, because there's so much of the stories that weren't told. And that's really what most people want. They want to know the lascivious nature of these people, because
you do a fantastic job of laying it all out in a way that you never get lost. It's like you're holding my hand as you walk through this crazy true crime story is what it is.
Yeah, I appreciate that. One of the things that I was taught is to be considerate to the reader. You don't want to leave them hanging. You want to spoon feed them the information in a chronological order, but you need to provide the background so that they understand. You need to tell the story in a succinct way and get to the point, get to the allegory, which is the most important part of the story. And in this book, there's a warning on the cover, and it says, politicians lie, cheat, and steal. The contents of this book are hazardous to their career. And, there's a term called confirmation bias.
I'm familiar.
Yeah, I know you are. And this book confirms the confirmation bias. Most politicians likely are stealing in some way, because they would be a fool not to. They collude with one another. They protect one another. This is all in this story, how he was not only up against the coroner and these other politicians, but all of them, because they're all in it together.
Yeah, they're looking out for each other and covering each other's backs, which is a great segue to the latest book, the No Limit Big Game Hunting, which I'm halfway through right now.
Yeah, and this one is really kind of takes your breath away. By
the way, you can say whatever you want on here.
Well, it's fascinating. These are true crime stories. All this stuff happened. These are real people. They got caught. They rarely get caught. So these are rare true crime stories. This is all going to wind up on television at some point, I can assure you, because it's the most consumed product out there when it comes to television. Genre, yeah. True crime is what people watch. I watch a lot of it, and I would love to see this stuff put on Netflix or Discovery ID, something like that. But No Limit's really interesting. What happens is Terry and his group of crime-fighting military guys, you have a retired general from the Army, a retired colonel from the Marine Corps who's also an esquire, he's an attorney, and a pastor, which makes him really interesting. You have a former cop. Terry was in the Navy. And you have a CEO of a shipping business from New York who's just fed up like the rest of them with all the corruption in St. Tammany. Now, St. Tammany is the most affluent parish in the state, and it has the highest education level as well. I don't know if it's the most corrupt place in Louisiana, but it's one of the most. The sheriff, it turned out, was a pedophile. And he had groomed these young boys in his community, started to rape and abuse them. But to keep them close to him, Jack Strain is his name. To keep them close, he employed two of these men running work release facilities in St. Tammany Parish. And they would have to kick back the money from the work release centers to him.
So these convicts, they would, as part of their incarceration, would have to go work at these work release programs, and those funds, the sheriff would hold back those funds.
That's right.
And manipulate the way they were getting paid, basically.
Exactly, because they would have to pay for their upkeep, pay for their room and board, because they were it was a privilege.
It was corrupt is what it was.
It was corrupt, that's right. And he wasn't abiding by all the federal consent decrees that, there's a certain level of care that they had to provide, medicine, food, and they were breaking all those rules. But the gentleman, he had tapped the people who were victims of him sexually. They were now men. He puts them in there to keep them close, to keep them quiet. He's paying them well. They're kicking the money back to him. They were not up for the task. They didn't have the skills they needed to do these jobs because it's serious work. There's a lot going on, a lot of moving parts in one of these facilities, and they were overwhelmed. They weren't doing the things that they needed to do, which spurred a bunch of complaints within the ranks of the inmates. And then they tell their family members and friends, and they can't believe that's really going on inside the jail. And so they started to get this information to the FBI. And the FBI finally decided, because Terry and them had a rapport with them.
Concerned citizens of St. Tammany.
The concerned citizens of St.
Tammany. They had a
Tammany.
reputation after this first.
That's right, after the first one, so they gained credibility. And that's a critical part that I should cover, is that Terry and these guys are clever. The FBI says there's no one like them in America because they learned that once they got proof of criminality through a signed affidavit swearing that it's true, they would fill out a complaint and file it with proof of criminality with the FBI, and then it becomes a political issue within the Bureau. A citizen or a group of citizens have submitted this, proving that these guys are committing crimes. They have to do something about it because they're on the hook. And so that has really fueled their success. And so the FBI goes to investigate the malfeasance, them not doing their job the way they're supposed to at the jails. The victims of the sheriff, during these interviews with the FBI, they just come clean. They're like, the guy's been raping me since I was a kid. And they're like, what? And basically, Sheriff Strain gets 4 life terms for the rapes that he committed. And they did not even cover the financial crimes, which is a sad thing because his family kept millions of dollars that he had stolen over the years. And that's one of the things that people don't realize is the FBI will go out and they'll do their job. They'll put these people away. They'll get convictions working with the U.S. attorneys. But in terms of clawing back the money that they stole, that's not part of it. And I don't know really whose job that is. Because it doesn't seem like it's a regular thing that they do. And that's one of the sore spots you get. It's consistent with all these stories that they usually keep all the money that they've stolen.
Well, I mean, I could literally listen to you all day, but give me the name of the 2 books and where can people buy them if they want to?
Yeah, Dead People, Crazy People, Drugs and Politicians. It has a foreword by Greg Ferris. Those in the Baton Rouge area will know him. He was the former sheriff, former police department. He was the inspector general.
He's a good man.
He came up with the title of the book. He wrote the foreword. And then No Limit Big Game Hunting. And it has a warning on the front. It has a little R here, and it says, restricted. The factual accounts herein may be graphic and violent at some times. And it is. But
where can people get them?
They can get them at terrymking.com, amazon.com, chriswarnerauthor.com. They're on Kindle, and you can get the hard copies through terrymking.com. Contact one of our websites. We can get you the books.
Cool beans. So, man, yeah. You are my author friend, is how I introduce you to everybody. So this podcast, in the course of doing our work, we meet a lot of interesting characters, and we, the videos we make, the stories we tell, they're some, pretty intentional, and so there's always a lot left on the edit room floor that doesn't make it, and so I wanted this podcast to be a chance for people to get to meet the people that we feature. That the project that we worked on together was it was a 30-minute documentary episode called you have to say it because I'm not
Traiteur.
The Traiteur.
Yeah.
Can you explain how that came about and what that was about, and what your thoughts have going through the process with us? And
yeah, well, growing up in South Louisiana, it's just a unique enclave. There's so many different cultural nuances that are different from other places. It's unique.
It is that.
It's very Mediterranean, the French and Spanish influences. And one of the local healers is called a traiteur, and there's a bunch of them. They inherit this ability from someone in their family, and they lay their hands on people and pray in French, and they heal you, and doesn't work for everyone, but I've seen it. I watched my younger brothers had warts when they were little, and my grandmother brought us, and the warts disappeared, and they were nasty looking things, and they were gone. And I was like, it worked, and you were talking to me about what do you think would be an interesting documentary, and I said traiteurs are really interesting. That's an interesting aspect of the Cajun culture, and not many people know about it. And there is a bit of mystery there. I think a lot of it's psychology and the belief of faith, that we probably can heal ourselves and we don't know it, that sort of thing.
So I was looking to get some reps in and do a couple of different projects in that sort of space, and I like the idea of that story too. So we jumped in and spent a couple of days. I forget the name of it. It's New Iberia is where you're from. We spent a couple of days in New Iberia, and the gentleman that we featured, the traiteur, also a hat maker. Can you tell us about him?
Yeah,
he was cool.
Colby Hebert, really talented, precocious 34-year-old. He was in his early 30s, I know, when we first met him. And he is a talented hat maker in downtown Lafayette. He has a spot there. He took an apprenticeship under a hat maker on the East Coast and learned the craft himself that way, and then came back, opened up his own shop. I think he was first on Magazine Street in New Orleans, then he was back in New Iberia for a while, and now he's in Lafayette downtown. And he makes hats for movie stars and,
very unique hats.
Yeah, he's extremely talented, and he can kind of make it out of any material that you want, add different accents that he actually collects from the swamp, animals and hides and stuff like that. He's an eclectic fellow, and there's a little bit of mystery about him. He even dabbled as an actor for a while, so he's kind of always in costume, as you recall. Yeah. He plays the part. But Colby Hebert is his name, and if you're ever down there in downtown Lafayette, you want to go get treated, he does that in the back of his hat shop, and you might like a hat or two. He's got some nice ones.
Yeah, I found part of the joy of the work that we do here is, we're telling other people's stories, and so you get to meet these really interesting characters, and he certainly was one of those. He had his traiteur setup, I guess, his little, what would they call that, an altar, I guess, out back.
He did.
Whatever.
Yeah.
And so we spent a good bit of time back there. He gave you a treatment as well as part of the episode.
I need another one, I think.
Maybe.
Yeah.
But it was a lot of fun. We actually released that first edit of that. It's on the Facebook page at Movee Media. So it's one of the first things we posted actually when we launched that social media channel. So it's unlike a lot of the projects we're working on, it's right there out there. So if you want to go see that episode with this fella here in it, then you go to our Facebook page at Movee Media and scroll all the way down, and you will find that episode of the Traiteur up there. So it was a lot of fun working with you out there.
That was fun.
Yeah.
We need to do something else.
Dude, I'm looking at your books, and legitimately, funding is always an issue, but these things, you're not kidding, man. They're going to be made into something, and there's so much content in there to do.
Yeah, the No Limit's fascinating. There's a couple of unsolved murder mysteries in St. Tammany Parish that have both been on national podcasts. James Patterson, the famous author, covers one of them. The fire chief's wife is found dead in their home. She has 4 bullets in her head, and the house is completely razed to the ground. It's been burned, and she was having an affair with the current sheriff. And then the current sheriff holds a press conference, and he absolves the fire chief, says he had nothing to do with it, but he's going to find the real killer. 7 years later, they're still looking.
Yeah, no doubt. Don't take a genius.
Yeah, it's alarming to say the least. But these are true stories, and that's mainly what people want. I do dabble in writing fiction, but I really like to tell true stories. I think that's what most people like, and we learn so much from a true story. First of all, most people go, "This really happened?" Yeah, it really happened. And they're like, whoa, and so people pause, and then they get into it, and they realize, wow, that maybe could have been me,
I knew that guy.
Yeah. I know someone like him. Or I wonder if my politician in my area is corrupt like this. And they probably are.
Yeah, no doubt.
I tell you, it's disappointing. And that's where we are as a country right now. So this is all really apropos. It's unfortunately, but we have to deal with things head on. That was one of the things I remember. Joe Gilchrist at the Floribama, the patriarch there, he was a wise fellow. He always had a line or two of advice, and one of the things I recall him saying is he said, I love Southern people. He said they've made me a really wealthy and successful person, and Joe always gave back generously. But he said one of the things I don't like about Southerners is the way they kick the can down the road. He said you have to deal with things when they come up in business and in life. He said if you let things fester, he goes, it'll be your undoing. He said you have to deal with your problems. You have to deal with things head on. And I've always remembered that. He's right,
It's good advice.
Yeah, and he was a guy that I never saw lose his cool. He really operated from a kindness standpoint. He was extremely generous. People did take advantage of him, but he still gave, and it's fun to watch somebody operate like that because there are very few. I saw him give away millions of dollars, and just constantly writing checks to people, helping people. And he lived like a pauper, but gave money away like a king. And that's quite a legacy, All
right, dude. Well, maybe in the future we'll make one of your stories. We'll take one of your books and turn it into a movie. How about that? But until then, I'm going to get on with the rest of
thanks for having me.
I really appreciate the time, man. It's been awesome. Thanks.
It has been terrific.